Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the main takeaways from the annual Ethereum Developer Conference Devcon. I'll also give some quick updates from the latest Pectra testing call, which happened on Thursday during the usual time developers have their ACD calls. But there was no ACD call this week. Instead of an ACD call, they had a Pectra testing call. So I'll share some quick updates from that call. And finally, I'll be sharing some programming notes as the week that I usually record these episodes for the upcoming week. It's actually American Thanksgiving. It's a holiday here in the U.S., so there will be no Infinite Jungles for another week. But I will share some programming notes about other content that will be coming up from Infinite Jungle that will keep all you listeners hopefully engaged and busy while the show goes on another week-long hiatus. Before we get started with the show, here is a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Getting started with Devcon 2024, there was a lot of takeaways from the conference. It was held in Bangkok, Thailand this year, and I gotta say it was really great to meet so many people in person. Right now I'm kind of in an empty room, just staring at a camera, but being able to meet people that actually listen to the show and getting to meet my listeners IRL was really fun. So honestly, one of the takeaways I wanted to start off with was a big thank you to everyone who came up to me during the conference and told me that they listened to this show. So thank you. That was a really wonderful experience. And I got to say, at Devcon, I think there were quite a few major announcements shared by various Ethereum projects. The Ethereum Name Service, ENS, announced that they're going to be launching their own L2 by the end of next year called the Name Chain. There was a couple other major announcements that I want to go over, and I want to share kind of why I think most of these technical announcements from the week were actually a distraction from what I thought was the most compelling takeaway from the conference, and that is what Ethereum means as a philosophy. Ethereum as a series of values and beliefs about how to build a technology. I think that was really the main takeaway, at least for me, from the conference. Of course, probably the biggest announcement that perhaps some of my listeners have already seen on X and on the other social media channels, the announcement of the Beam chain by Ethereum Foundation researcher Justin Drake. This was by far the most highly anticipated announcement of the week. I tried to go see Justin sharing this announcement in person, but even beyond Vitalik speaking and all these other high-profile names, the capacity of the room was not just standing room only. It was like people were the overflow of people was out the door of the stage, and it was impossible. At least, when I was running to go see that talk, it was impossible for me to even enter the room because of how large the crowd was just outside of the room. So it was a very highly anticipated announcement. I think partially also because Justin did talk about it in advance slightly. He kept most of the content of what he was about to share under wraps, but just kind of hinted that it would be a really major announcement about the future of the Ethereum protocol. So what is the Beam chain? The Beam chain is a pretty ambitious proposal for how to radically overhaul Ethereum's consensus layer, the Beacon chain. The Beacon chain was launched in December of 2020 and officially merged with Ethereum, the protocol, on September 15th, 2022. And since then, there has been quite a lot of technical debt that has accumulated on the Beacon chain. And there are quite a few advancements in technology, specifically zero-knowledge tech, that could be applied to make the consensus layer of Ethereum far more secure and faster, more efficient. So rather than trying to implement all of these improvements to the Beacon chain piecemeal, Justin Drake's proposal was to move forward with what he calls the Beam chain upgrade. And this is, again, a major upgrade to the consensus layer that would bundle many different updates to the Beacon chain in just one upgrade. This would have additional benefits for Ethereum, like making Ethereum quantum resistant, able to stick around for decades to come, even in the event that there is a commercially used quantum computer. Again, it would utilize the cutting edge of zero-knowledge technology so that Ethereum block times can be faster and transaction confirmation speeds can be a lot faster as well. So lots of I guess, exciting, like, technical upgrades to Ethereum for people to look forward to. I think there was quite a few questions, however, regarding this Beam chain proposal. First question, of course, was this all sounds all well and great, but how soon can the Beam chain be the idea turn into a reality? And there was a straw man timeline that Justin was sharing, and that timeline basically put the Beam chain activation sometime in 2030, so quite a ways out. There was also the question of how the Beam chain would be funded and developed, and how developers could go about creating it. And Justin had proposed the effort of a whole new series of consensus layer client teams, dedicated consensus layer client teams that could work on the Beam chain in parallel to all of the upgrades happening through the existing consensus layer and execution layer client teams. And it kind of harks back to the way that developers prepared for the merge. So there were execution layer developers, there were a group of Ethereum developers that was not only maintaining the Ethereum protocol, but upgrading the Ethereum protocol to make it more proficient in smaller, more manageable ways. In parallel, there was a slew of other development teams, primarily funded by the Ethereum Foundation, especially in those early years, funded by the Ethereum Foundation to work on the Beacon chain, to develop this entirely new consensus layer protocol, proof of stake consensus layer protocol that eventually the Ethereum blockchain could transition over to. So this idea that the Beam chain would be created in a similar manner meant a question of who are these new consensus layer client teams? Who is funding them? What does this mean for existing consensus layer client teams? Does this mean that they'll somehow become obsolete in the next, say, like 5 or 10 years? So there was quite a bit of disagreement, I would say, in the community about this Beam chain proposal. And I talked about this in my takeaways for the Galaxy Research newsletter, and I'm going to link to that post I made in the newsletter in the show notes in case you want to read it in full. But the one thing I really want to emphasize around the Beam chain is that it was by no means the set roadmap for the Ethereum protocol over the next 5-10 years, however long. It was merely a proposal by Justin for how developers could look ahead to kind of the final end state of what the Ethereum Beacon chain, Ethereum's consensus layer, should be. Justin started off with the talk saying that this is by no means the consensus view of the Ethereum Foundation or the Ethereum protocol developers at large. And it was already clear from all of the comments and the discussion that other Ethereum protocol developers were sharing about their thoughts on the Beam chain, that the Beam chain is by no means a finalized kind of roadmap for Ethereum to pursue. And in a similar way, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, when Vitalik shares kind of the roadmap for Ethereum, you might have heard of the merge, the splurge, the purge, the verge, all of these rhyming words. This is the idea of one person, of one clearly very important person in the Ethereum developer community, sharing their thoughts on what the main objectives and priorities of the Ethereum blockchain should be. However, for any of these proposals, any of these ideas to really materialize and move forward, it requires the consensus of a much larger group of stakeholders. And by no means did the Beam Chain announcement, and even I would say as I'm recording this, I don't think it's gained more legitimacy over the last couple of weeks, I would say, since it's been announced. There is the possibility that the Beam Chain could become the final kind of the end state of the Ethereum consensus layer, but it's going to have to go through many years of testing and of iteration. It's going to need the buy-in of many different Ethereum stakeholders, including L2s and staking pools, and obviously the client teams. But beyond that, will require just far more consensus to be created. So I think that the Beam Chain announcement was a distraction because it truly was an idea put forth by one researcher, and it was by no means the kind of North Star that developers or the entire Ethereum community could look to as kind of the shared vision for what they believe Ethereum should become and should prioritize in the next, say, a couple of years. Whereas for the merge, which was Ethereum's proof of stake upgrade, that was a North Star. That was kind of like a guiding upgrade that almost every single member of the Ethereum community was looking forward to as kind of the end state of what Ethereum would eventually become. Ethereum would become many things. We'll talk about it later in the show, but ideally, the world computer, a globally distributed compute platform where individuals can and companies can deploy unstoppable applications. There's this idea of that being Ethereum and that being the vision that developers are trying to build towards, but also that in this end state of Ethereum would be a proof of stake blockchain. Ethereum would not rely on miners, on this very intensive hashing algorithm to produce blocks. Ethereum in its end state would be proof of stake. And that is something everybody agreed on, almost everybody. Obviously, the miners were quite disgruntled. But even the miners knew that their time was coming short. And this was the last phase of Ethereum's original development roadmap. It was that phase was initially called Serenity at the time. So achieving the milestone of the merge was truly it was not controversial for resources to be put towards this effort. It did bring together Ethereum as a community, all of its different stakeholders. And I think the Beam Chain in its current form lacks that ability. It lacks the ability to bring the community together to a shared common goal. The Beam Chain was by no means that, which is why I say that it was a bit of a distraction because at the end of the day, it was simply a proposal by one researcher. A very cool proposal at that, and one that I'm sure will go through many iterations as Justin continues to pill other people on the vision. So yeah, the Beam Chain was obviously one of the most highly anticipated announcements. I think that it was not as important of an announcement as some people made it out to be. Another kind of announcement that I think has gained that a lot of people have been talking about post-Devcon has been this idea of native rollups, quote unquote. This was shared by Gnosis co-founder Martin Kopelman, he did a talk at Devcon talking about the need for native L2s on Ethereum. What are native L2s? I'm literally pulling up my notes here. Native L2s are L2s built with Ethereum values in mind, values such as decentralization and credible neutrality. So it's no secret that many L2s rely on centralized sequencers, centralized individuals or entities that are responsible for ordering transactions and producing blocks on the L2. The concern is that these L2s are very fragmented and that these L2s are not credibly neutral like the Ethereum base layer is. And Martin's argument was that that 128 quote-unquote native rollups should be created, and these rollups would practically what it means is that these native rollups would operate without multi-sigs that control the critical functions of the rollup. The rollup would have multiple implementations of its proof system, the ability to verify the blocks and transactions that are processed on the rollup. And finally, the code base of the rollup would not only be open source, but there would be rigorous testing for that rollup code base. Just like the code base of Ethereum is rigorously tested and has the eyes of thousands of different coders and individuals on GitHub. So it mimics kind of the development style of Ethereum, and it by no means does it mean that these 128 rollups, that they'll be all built by the Ethereum Foundation. Being a native rollup doesn't, in Martin's view, mean that it's built by the Ethereum protocol developers, nor do I actually think that protocol developers would have the bandwidth to build this. But it does mean that these rollups share qualities and traits and security assurances and features that the Ethereum base layer has. So I maintain that this is a very in theory, it's a good idea. In theory, you would want a rollup that is maximally decentralized and transparent. And the idea of launching multiple of these native rollups at a time is to ensure that these rollups are also interoperable with one another. One of the problems with the rollup ecosystem that exists now is not only that they have centralized points of failure. It's that these rollups are all built by separate companies. And so the interoperability between these rollups is quite lacking, which makes UX, the user experience from moving between rollups, interacting with apps on these various rollups, very difficult. So Martin was proposing the idea of native rollups to launch a bundle at a time that's maximally decentralized and has very high interoperability as a way to scale Ethereum and do so by offering the same kind of assurances and security guarantees as what Ethereum base layer provides users today, users that are interacting with smart contracts on the base layer of Ethereum. And again, while this is all good in theory, I was a bit confused as to how this idea could be implemented in practice, because all L2 projects, I'm under the impression all L2 projects are working towards this. I don't think there's a single rollup team, if it was in their power to easily kind of decentralize and become a very extremely interoperable with other rollups, to be able to achieve these kinds of characteristics of what Martin was describing about a native rollup. But I think technologically there are challenges to decentralizing rollups in a secure way. I also think that business-wise, for a rollup team to gain the funding and the I guess like financial support of what they're doing to create a business model around their rollup, it is very difficult to achieve all of these features of a native rollup at once. All of the L2s L2s are a very nascent, I would say, L2 rollups are a very nascent idea for scaling Ethereum that in recent years has is a solution that Ethereum Foundation and Ethereum protocol developers have actually outsourced. So while the Ethereum base layer is continuing to be developed, and there's these great ideas around the Beam chain and others about how to improve Ethereum, the base layer, and how to make it more resilient, the problem of scaling Ethereum in a decentralized manner through rollups is something that teams like Arbitrum, Optimism, Scroll, so many have really tried to tackle and are continuing to tackle. And it takes quite a few resources, as per the millions of dollars that have been raised by these various L2 rollup teams. So all this to say that this idea of native rollups, I think, is easier said than done. And the part of Martin's kind of presentation that I thought was a bit lacking was around next steps of how to go about implementing this vision and whether that vision would actually look any different from what is going on right now of, Ethereum protocol developers outsourcing the task of building these incredibly decentralized, secure, robust rollups to teams that are funded, to teams that can pursue these ideas and investigate them and experiment with them, which again is what's happening now. This explosion of kind of different L2s launching on Ethereum, all with different strategies of how to be the most scalable and be the most secure rollup, with various different trade-offs, of course, is what is happening on the L2 side. And so while having 128 quote-unquote native rollups with no multi-sigs, with multiple implementations of rollup proof systems, rigorous testing of the open source code base. While all of this is really great in theory, I think there's a reason that we haven't seen that yet on Ethereum. From a technological and business standpoint, I think that it's been difficult to achieve this. Not that it's not going to be achieved, but that it's clearly taking these roll-up teams time. And I'm unclear as to what really the innovation is here from Martin on how to actually achieve maximally decentralized rollups. So again, I think the announcement, or like one of the takeaways of native rollups really being the saving grace for Ethereum's scalability roadmap, and it being the exciting kind of next step for Ethereum's evolution as a scalable general purpose blockchain, again fell short in my eyes. In terms of being like a promising solution for what people can look forward to next. The other part of the Devcon conference that at least stood out in my eyes, other than the Beam chain, other than native rollups, was the DAC philosophy. This was not new, of course. It was nothing announced. This was not an announcement made during the Devcon week, but it was a full day of Devcon programming that was dedicated to exploring the ideas of this philosophy. DAC stands for Defensive Acceleration, and I will link to the post by Vitalik where he talks about this DAC philosophy in more detail. But in short, DAC is a set of values and beliefs around how to develop technologies in such a way that doesn't slow their innovation, but tries to develop them as maximally quickly as possible, but in such a way where human intervention and values of human freedom, democracy, and of privacy are all preserved. And of course, this is extremely subjective in terms of practically how this looks. But when you think about a future where AI, artificial intelligence, is very ingrained into every aspect of human society, there is this concern that AI would eventually replace the role of humans in various aspects of society. And in this future, there could be a non-zero chance of AI kind of killing humanity. for good, which is very scary and kind of daunting. But in this philosophy of defensive acceleration, the fear of that kind of future is not something that should motivate individuals and scientists and companies from not innovating AI or to innovate it slower, but to try and innovate AI in such a way where human agency is not removed. So instead of AI being used to replace the role of artists and creatives, especially when they're using, one of the examples was around Photoshop. So like instead of AI creating artwork on behalf of a human being, trying to integrate or ideate ways in which AI can assist like an artist, a person who's trying to create digital artwork at every step of the creative process. So trying to ideate ways in which technology that isn't just specific to AI, but even blockchains and biotech and all these other areas of technical development, how to develop them in a very mindful way such that these technologies are maximally decentralized, are maximally transparent, incredibly neutral. These values that are often overlap with cypherpunk values as well, that are kind of like the bedrock of what has of this entire industry of crypto. And so there's a full day of programming to talk about the DAC philosophy, to talk about other areas of technical innovation where this philosophy could be applied. And I actually found that this day of programming was a lot more compelling than some of the technical panels that I saw, some of the technical announcements that I was covering during the Devcon week, because this is my kind of concluding takeaway from the week, that rather than a particular technical roadmap, upgrade, or even team of developers at the conference, more than those ideas of how Ethereum, the technology, could evolve, there was a slew of content and programming to reiterate and reinforce what the bedrock values of Ethereum as a philosophy for building blockchains should be, to value and to promote these features of permissionlessness, transparency, trust minimization in all that the Ethereum community is building over and above other features like scalability, UX, etc., which is clearly a very big goal, a high priority for many other blockchain ecosystems out there, but for the Ethereum community to kind of double down on building systems that are maximally decentralized, credibly neutral, and open source. And this vision was really not just iterated throughout the DAC kind of programming day, but there was a panel on Ethereum values and ethos alignment. There were representatives of the Geth team, the Ethereum Foundation, an L2 Rollup that talked about what is the value of Ethereum, and almost every single panelist did agree that decentralization is one of like the utmost, most important values of Ethereum. There was a talk by Flashbot's co-founder Philip Diane, who talked about the characteristics of Ethereum 3.0, and he didn't talk about Ethereum 3.0 in the perspective of what Ethereum, the technology, would look like, but he basically reiterated how important the vision of Ethereum 3.0 must be, in that Ethereum 3.0, no matter what it looks like as a technology, must have the characteristics of being permissionless, distributed, geo-economically decentralized, neutral, builder efficient. And these talks, I would say, were the most compelling of the week. Of the discussions that I was part of the people that I met, they're the biggest source of encouragement for why they're building in the Ethereum ecosystem was not necessarily towards a particular upgrade or a particular because of a particular development team or their confidence in, say, like the Ethereum Foundation and the talent of developers, but this shared common belief among the community that the reason why Ethereum is different and the reason why Ethereum matters is because it is trying to build a blockchain, a general purpose blockchain that is open, that is permissionless, that is transparent and trust minimized. And that truly, I think, was the most compelling, I would say, like North Star vision for Ethereum in light of Devcon week. These are not values that Ethereum by any means have been the first to pursue or to reiterate, or to kind of like embody. Of course, these are the values in which Bitcoin was founded and that the Bitcoin community still ardently holds to. Of course, Bitcoin is the most decentralized, at least in my view, the most kind of decentralized cryptocurrency out there. But it, in the process of being maximally decentralized, has sacrificed quite a few other features. For example, has sacrificed quite a bit of functionality when it comes to what you can do on the Bitcoin blockchain, sacrificed quite a bit in terms of innovation. Bitcoin very rarely has upgrades, and when it does, its governance is quite contentious and has in the past led to blockchain splits. In a similar way, blockchain splits have occurred on the Ethereum side too, but Ethereum, in comparison to Bitcoin, upgrades far more frequently. Its governance is far more robust, or at least is more tested. Governance exists on Ethereum, whereas for Bitcoin, I would say governance takes a little bit more of a backseat. The code base is very rarely touched. So Ethereum as a technology, I think there's quite a few question marks of what Ethereum will look like as a technology. However, the biggest kind of takeaway from Devcon was that Ethereum, even though there's quite a few questions remaining of what it'll look like as a technology and functionally what it will do, but that all aspects of the Ethereum community, whether you're an L2 builder or a protocol developer or an app developer, some of the guiding principles of like why you're building and what you're building for is to build applications and to build for systems that are more open source, that are more transparent, that are more decentralized than the current systems that we see in our world today. And so there wasn't, a specific technical roadmap for individuals to look ahead to for Ethereum, but there was a series of values and beliefs that many speakers converged on, and that I would say many attendees kind of took away from the conference, realizing that this is what Ethereum is, and this is what Ethereum. This is why I build on Ethereum, or this is why I'm part of the Ethereum community. And that I found was quite encouraging and showed a little bit of a departure from the technology of Ethereum being really what guides Ethereum's value. And hopefully in the future, I think no matter what Ethereum looks like as a technology, the value, so long as these features of Ethereum and so long as these values are preserved, I think Ethereum as a technology will still continue to matter. So, though Ethereum as a technology today is the world's most decentralized and valuable and mature general purpose blockchain, there's still quite a few questions of how that general purpose blockchain will evolve, and many questions about the way that Ethereum, the base layer, will continue to support the layer 2 rollups. Ethereum as a philosophy for how to go about building these technologies, I think is starting to, these values are starting to harden. And at Devcon, I think the most important takeaway was the importance of converging on a set of values related to human freedom and privacy and open source technical development that in the end, I think that is really what gives Ethereum the most value today, despite all of the confusion around Ethereum's technical roadmap, which again was not resolved at Devcon. I would say that the hardening of values, of those specific values, were really the biggest takeaway and the biggest, I would say, encouragement for communities, for community members of people that identify as like an Ethereum stakeholder or somebody building on Ethereum. It was the most kind of encouraging aspect or takeaway, I would say, of the week. So there you have it. Those were my takeaways from Devcon. And yes, this episode is getting a tad bit longer than my usual episodes, but very quickly in the last couple minutes, I wanted to share some quick technical updates around the Pectra upgrade. Instead of having an ACD call, as developers, many developers are still traveling and recovering from the Devcon week, as am I, to be quite honest. I think my internal clock is still catching up to New York hours. Some developers stuck around and did a Pectra testing call on Thursday. Usually when the ACD calls are. They shared that the Mekong testnet remains stable. They haven't seen quite a few community participation or engagement in the Mekong testnet quite yet, but likely that testnet will stay up and running at least until the end of the year. Developers are continuing to prepare for the launch of Pectra DevNet 5. Developers haven't quite yet finalized yet the scope of that testnet, but they're hoping to do so this upcoming week on the next ACD call. This will be the first ACD call back from Devcon, and the idea is once developers kind of agree on the final set of specifications for DevNet 5, developers will try and launch it the week after. So over the next 2 weeks or so, developers are trying to launch DevNet 5, Pectra DevNet 5. There was also discussion on the Pectra testing call of including a blob capacity increase in Pectra DevNet 6. Of course, this means that developers will have to agree on what that blob capacity increase will be. However, there were discussions on how to change the blob target without changing the blob max, which makes me think that the capacity increase from a target of 3 blobs per block to 4 blobs per block could be a likely kind of consensus that developers end up taking to increase the blob capacity just by 1 blob per block. But we shall see. Developers are trying to, hoping to kind of like finalize that for Pectra DevNet 6. And then finally, developers did share that they will hold off on the rebase of the PeerDAS and EOF specifications to Pectra until the Pectra DevNet 5 specs are finalized. So rather than doing all the heavy lifting of trying to rebase PeerDAS and EOF, which is pre-slated for the Fusaka upgrade, now they'll hold off until the Pectra DevNet 5 specifications are finalized. And already I'm seeing on X, there's some discussions on what else should be included into Fusaka outside of PeerDAS and EOF. One of those contenders is EPBS, Enshrined Proposer Builder Separation, or though as POTUS and Terrence, the Prism team, like to call it, payload block separation, separating the execution payload from the consensus block. Fun kind of programming note for my listeners. Tomorrow there will be an episode precisely on this topic, on EPBS, that I will share with an interview that I had with POTUS and Terrence on this topic. And that will actually be the last Infinite Jungle episode for about a week. Next week is American Thanksgiving, so the show is going to go on another week-long hiatus. I do apologize about that. But this, I hope the content around my takeaways from Devcon has given you quite a bit to chew on, quite a bit to think on. And then tomorrow's episode with POTUS and Terrence will also be a bit of a longer Infinite Jungle episode where we'll get into the nitty-gritty of EPBS, some outstanding questions related to EPBS and its likelihood for inclusion in Fusaka. So another kind of information jam-packed episode for all my listeners to dig into, and then I will see you guys back here again in 2 weeks' time, which by then will be December, already the last month of the year. So kind of crazy how time flies. Thank you so much to all of my listeners that came back to listen to the takeaways from Devcon. I hope that you learned something new about Ethereum, and I hope everyone's staying warm out there, or depending on where you are, but especially in New York, it's getting a bit colder. I am signing off from the concrete jungle that is New York City. In your explorations of the infinite jungle that is Ethereum, stay safe out there.